have 3 losses by now.
I don't know about that.
They are not that good.
Put Florida State in there, I would say yes to that, what you just said.
One return by Caleb Downs, and he finds a seam. He makes the punter look silly. Caleb Downs, show him what you got. Touchdown, Bama.
5-minute drive now for UTEP. And they will keep it on the ground. Amblot just gets pile-driven by Stutzman.
They really haven't even tried from the shotgun. That throw's intercepted. Pierce down the sideline. Touchdown.
Claiborne, the sophomore, has 1 score so far this season. Griffiths will buy a little bit of time. Falling down, lost the football. Play is still live. And recovered by the Monarchs. Lamarian James will take it the other way for the ODU touchdown.
Welcome back to Devy IDP Grind. I am Hollywood Titan. I'm joined by my co-host, Justice. What's going on, man?
Oh, not much, man. Just Wednesday night in the middle of summer. Football not too long, not too far away now.
Oh, yeah, and it's only going to get – yes, it's just right around the corner for sure.
I don't know, like 70 days maybe?
Sorry we missed – yeah, something like that. Sorry we missed a few weeks. I had a schedule change at work, so I wasn't able to do Mondays like we normally do, and then we had a couple of deaths in the family, and Justice was out of town for a week or two, so hopefully we're back on track. As you know, we do coaching changes and break down the IDPs of each conference. It's what we've been doing this offseason, so we're up to the ACC this week. Before we get to that, we got some news and notes. So a lot of you've heard that EA Sports is returning with their college football game, and they now have partnered with GameStop for a homecoming edition, which is going to go for $149.99. It's going to include a detailed mini locker, a replica jersey, and a branded football, as well as the game. So you got that to look forward to if that's your thing.
A replica jersey of like is the EA Sports jersey or is it a specific team or?
I have not seen that part yet. It just says a replica jersey and then a branded football. So I don't know if it's going to be EA Sports or if they're going to allow you to pick certain teams. The article really didn't say, and I didn't find it anywhere else or have time to look at it, but it didn't really go into any detail as to what that is. So I guess it could be EA Sports. I mean, that would make sense if it was theirs, but I don't think I'm that big of a fan that I want an EA Sports jersey and football in a locker.
No, but like if you get to pick a college jersey, it might be worth it, but yeah, I don't know. I'm just looking now. Game.
And I would like to know what that mini locker is too.
It says EA Sports College Football 25 replica athletic jersey. Huh. I mean, the EA Sports football is definitely an EA branded football.
Not exactly 100% sure on that.
College Football 25 replica athletic.
I'm assuming all that is, but
you would assume so, but it says frame for jersey not included. Huh.
See, I didn't see that where I was looking. I hadn't seen that part. It just said a replica jersey.
Yeah, I'm looking at the GameStop website, and it's only for PlayStation 5. It's only a PlayStation 5 only package.
Oh wow! See, I didn't read that either. It just said the locker, the jersey, and the ball.
Huh.
But that, if you're into gaming, that's something you can kind of look to. You were talking about the season being right around the corner, which brings me to this. TNT has sub-licensed a select package of games from ESPN for the 2024 season. So they want a select package. From what I read, it's going to be a mix of maybe some day games and some primetime games. But I'm guessing from what I saw, it would be mostly primetime because that's probably where more of your viewership, your viewers are going to come from. Probably a bigger return value on the primetime games is like the early games anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah, it didn't say how many games or like specific conferences. It just said a select group of games for primetime. So be interesting to see what that is because they've released NCAA's released the game time sets for all the college games. So maybe in a week or two we'll see kind of what that is or what teams that might be or games that might be. While we're into this branding and all this, the NCAA has approved on-field corporate logo advertising. So they're going to allow stadiums to have like a main sponsor logo, which would be, I don't know, whoever it is. You know, you could have a Walmart logo in the middle of the field, or you know, what you could have it like Oregon could have a Nike check in the middle of their field, or whatever it is. But they are going to allow that, and some of the reasoning is that it's going to help bring in some much needed revenue.
They got what a $2.7 billion bill they got to pay.
Yeah, well, and some of it was kind of to this packaging deal with ESPN, you know, where the SEC and the Big Ten is basically getting everything, right? So this kind of helps the Pac-12s, the Sun Belt. It kind of allows for them to bring in some more revenue to offset some of the loss that they're not getting in part of the big package, which I kind of understand. I mean, if you can do that and help your school, I'm all for it. I hope it don't get to the point where it's over logoed, right? Like,
well, it's only allowed in 3 spots. The 50-yard line and then 2 ancillary spots. So my guess is similar to what you see for a bowl game. Usually you might see a logo at the 50-yard line, and then you see 2 other smaller logos like at the 20 or 25-yard line, you know. And it's only on a game-by-game basis. So they have to ask each game.
And I hope that's right. Well, I would hope they would keep it that way. That way it's not, you know, over commercialized. I like to keep it kind of simple, but I don't have any problem with the main logo in the center of the field being, you know, a big corporate sponsor or whoever you want. I mean, especially if they're willing to pay up for that advertisement, right? I mean, that's a win-win for both. So
2 things. I think the next step is there's going to be sponsor logos on the jersey. There's going to be a patch. That'll be the next thing. And then like I was trying to think like, you know, EA Sports should like be on every freaking field, right? Just to promote the college football game.
Exactly. Yeah, I would imagine they will be everywhere. I don't know that, but I'm like you. If I was them, I'd be like, hey, if we're going to bring this game back and do all this, pay for these licenses and stuff, our name needs to be plastered everywhere.
Yeah.
Which leads us into, speaking of sponsors, the Arizona Bowl has a new sponsor, and it will be called the Gin and Juice Bowl after Snoop Dogg's brand. So you're going to have the Gin and Juice Bowl down there in Arizona. I can only imagine what comes out of this, but yeah, I think that's that's going to be one of the next big things. We've already kind of seen that with bowl games, right? The name changes and stuff. So I think with these playoff games, the expansion, I think you're going to see more of that. The Pac-12 and the Mountain West is gaining some traction. They've already agreed to a 6-game schedule for 2024. And I know me and you talked about this a lot. Pac-12 just everybody kind of left Washington State and Oregon State out there to fight for themselves, right? Just kind of hung them out to dry, which kind of sucks, right? But the more I think about it, and the more me and you talked about it, I was like, okay, the Pac-12 ain't officially dead. So they may only be 2 teams, but they have the rights to the conference. They have the rights to everything that the conference gets, right? So if they can get a group or another conference to join them, then they're still, I know you look at it and say, well, the Mountain West is nowhere near the SEC or the Big Ten. I get it, right? But having a conference join those 2 teams and keeping the Pac-12 intact, that's huge for them because they still get a big slice of the pie.
I don't know about that. Like, so they've already been relegated by the NCAA to the same status as G5. I forget, it's autonomous and non-autonomous, and so I think they're considered autonomous, which is the same as the rest of the G5. And so they have 2 years to get back to at least 8 members. But I don't think that guarantees them that they're back to where they were. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
I'm just saying they're taking a step in the right direction if they can get a conference to join, because they still have all those rights to the conference and everything else. If they can do that in 2 years.
Yeah, but I don't know. Like, I guess I guess I just don't see how it's going to be any different than them just joining the Mountain West. Because if they don't take all the Mountain West, they have to pay the Mountain West like $1.7 million or something like that. If they only take certain teams.
Right, and I may not be understanding it correctly, but from my view, I would pay it. I would pay that 1.7, because if you can get 6 or 8
I just take all the teams. Why wouldn't you take all the
join you too? That puts you back at. Yeah, I agree. I would take them all too. But one of the things I did see was some of the independents joining. Like Army would come over, Navy would move over, so they would have Air Force. I know, but there was a plan. Maybe they could get them to come over and have all 3 of the service academies in the same conference, because they play each other anyway.
Yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, we'll see. I just think that's a step in the right direction. If you can get those schools to come over, it's kind of showing that you're not completely dead. But
I think they're both waiting to see what happens with the ACC. And, if the ACC implodes, so to speak, and Clemson and Florida State and whoever else leave, then them 2 are hoping they get an invite to the ACC. That's what I think.
Possibly, yeah. And maybe the Mountain West joining as a fallback plan. Maybe that's kind of
exactly
how they're looking at it. So yeah, that kind of does it for like the non on the field stuff. All the branding and sponsors and expansion and all that. I got a few notes here. As for on the field, Auburn head coach Hugh Freeze says he was amazed by the lack of calls about the transfer portal. And the little interview or article that I read is he was amazed that, not that there's a requirement or anything like that, but he said it's just doing your due diligence, right? He said, if I'm looking to bring in a player through the portal, I'm going to reach out to their school and kind of, investigate and see what kind of player he is, see what kind of person he is off the field, just do your due diligence. And he said you would be surprised how little of that is actually happened. He's like, there's players that's entered the portal here and left, and he said they've landed at other schools, and he said I've not talked to the first person about it. No one's approached me at all and said, hey, what kind of player am I getting? You know, what kind of person then am I getting or anything? And he said, I think you're kind of setting yourself up to fail when you don't do that. And that kind of makes sense, right? It's kind of just like putting a quarter in a gumball machine and seeing what kind of prize you get. You know, is it a good prize or a
getting
bad
references for, well, that's why you get references on job interviews, right?
Exactly. So, oh yeah, before I get to that, Alabama safety Tony Mitchell has entered the transfer portal. So Alabama is outside of Malachi Moore, their safety group is going to be super young, and it was going to be young anyway, right? If they kept Caleb Downs, if they kept Tony Mitchell,
well, they got the
young,
kid from Michigan, right?
Yeah, Sabb, Keon Sabb. So, I mean, and he's still kind of young. I think he's a junior or a redshirt sophomore, if I remember correctly. So, I mean, outside of Moore, they're really, really young and inexperienced other than Sabb, because Sabb didn't play a whole lot for Michigan last year. So, it'll be interesting to see if Mitchell stays in the portal or he comes back. But I believe Mitchell was in the same recruiting class as Downs, and those were two huge gets when Saban was there. So both of those are now gone. Well, Downs is gone, and it looks like Mitchell is going to follow suit here. Am I freezing up? I can't tell.
No.
Okay. So we're closing in on July, and that's going to be a really hot recruiting month. There's a lot of visits set up between now and the 1st of August. And generally, the 1st of August, you kind of see the recruiting either slow down or stop because players are focusing on their high school seasons or whatever. So July is going to be a huge month as far as recruiting goes. So you're going to want to keep an eye on that because there is a bunch of top key players that are scheduled to commit coming in July. But with that in mind, we talked about Cormani McLean, who was recruited to Colorado to play for Coach Prime. He's left. He was in the portal. He was set to visit Florida, and now he's at Florida. There was a whole thing about that, but he's now a Florida Gator. Staying with the transfer portal, Terrence Brooks, the corner from Texas, he's committed to Illinois. And he was a big part of Texas's college championship football run last year. He had 20 tackles, 3 interceptions, 6 PBUs, still has 2 years of eligibility. That's a huge get for Illinois, as they've had some pretty good safeties over the year, Kirby Joseph and those guys that's come out in the draft. Tennessee corner Elijah Herring commits to Memphis. Or linebacker, I mean, he led the Vols in tackles. Yeah. He's a linebacker. He led the Vols last year with 80 tackles. He has 2 years of eligibility remaining, so and that's a pretty good get for the Tigers. And then you've got Florida A&M linebacker Johnny Chaney has committed to Colorado, and he led the Rattlers last year in tackles with 73 and was second the year before with 55. And he's a pretty good size linebacker, 6'3", 230. He could run pretty good. So he's not an elite athlete, but he's above average, and so he's going to take the step up from Division II to Colorado and see how that works. And they can use him, right, because they need all the help they can get on defense. And then the other one is Kent State defensive tackle C.J. West has committed to Indiana, and he has 2 40 tackle, 7 TFL seasons, and still has 1 year of eligibility. So there's some other ones. I mean, there's all kinds of players in the portal. I was reading a thing on 3 that there is. I posted it in our Discord, but there was something like 2,300 players this season in the portal. 9% of them had committed to play elsewhere. And 1.5% of those returned to the school that they were previously at. So there is a ton of players still out there in the portal that's not found a new home yet, which if they're chasing money, that's just insane to me. I think I froze.
No.
So, I mean, that does it for the news and notes. Well, my screen's freezing, so I can't tell if I'm freezing or not. So,
no.
Okay. So that does it for the news and notes. I mean, as far as the transfer portal goes, that's a staggering amount of players that's still looking for a home.
Are you
Sorry,
frozen now?
my screen's freezing. That's why I can't tell. I don't think so. But
you stopped talking.
Yeah,
so
sorry about that. Well, my screen freezes, and I couldn't tell if you were trying to say something. I didn't want to overcut you. So, that does it for the news and notes. So our 5-star topic, like I said at the top of the show, is coaching changes and a breakdown of the IDPs for the ACC. I'll be doing the coaching change part. Justice will break down who's leaving, who's coming in, as far as IDPs that we need to be watching for. So we'll get started and go right down the list here. Up first is the Boston College Eagles. So they have a whole new coaching staff. Jeff Hafley is out. The head coach, he went to Green Bay to be a defensive coordinator. You've got Azar Abdul Rahim, the co-defensive coordinator and defensive back coach. He went to Maryland to coach to be the co-defensive coordinator there. You've got Sean Duggan, who was the linebackers coach. He followed Hafley to Green Bay, and he's going to be a defensive assistant. Replacing them is going to be Bill O'Brien, the offensive coordinator. He was offensive coordinator at Ohio State. You've got Tim Lewis, who's going to be the defensive coordinator. He was formerly with the Arlington Renegades as a co-defensive coordinator. You've got Jeff Comasine. He was going to coach the defensive line. He's coming over from Maine. You've got Dan O'Brien, who's going to coach the linebackers. He's coming over from Navy, and you've got Ray Brown, who's going to coach the secondary for them. I was looking at our lads, and it looks like, if this is correct, it looks like they are going to run a 4-2-5. 4 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and 5 DBs. And we see a lot of that, right? We see that trend in the NFL a lot too. So
seems like it's like you see a more 3-3-5 than 4-2-5, but yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, they're going to have some really good players up front if they're only going to run 2 linebackers.
It just means one of those safeties, and when you're running five DBs, like chances are one of those safeties is playing in the box a lot.
Right.
All right. Player-wise, they lose their top 2 tacklers from a year ago, and linebacker Vinny DePalma, defensive back John Pupil. They're both out of eligibility. And defensive end Shidasila is off to Purdue. They bring in defensive lineman Sed McConnell from Illinois, cornerback Ryan Turner from Ohio State, and safety Cameron Martinez coming over also from Ohio State. As far as returners, their leading linebacker returner is Cam Arnold, last season with 65 total tackles. They also return defensive end Donovan Ezeruko, who is one of their top defensive linemen. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much probably those two guys are probably the two guys you're looking at possibly rostering in a from a college standpoint. Donovan Ezeruku definitely has some NFL potential as well. So next up is the California Bears. They don't have any defensive coaching changes. So looking at the players, they lose their top two tacklers from a year ago. Safety Patrick McMorris is off to the NFL. Linebacker Caleb Elarms-Orr is off to TCU. Cornerback Jeremiah Irby is off to Boise State. Linebacker Blake Ansulatos is in the portal. Not sure where he's ended up. They bring in safety Ryan Yates from LSU, defensive lineman TJ Bowlers from Wisconsin, and linebacker Liam Johnson coming over from Princeton. In terms of what they got returning, their top returning tackler is a defensive back Craig Woodson, who had 80 tackles a year ago. And then linebacker, the fourth leading tackler, linebacker Cade Ulave, had 67 tackles a year ago. They lose Jackson Sermon too, another loss there, linebacker. So they got a lot of holes to fill along that linebacking group. Next up is Clemson. You with us, Hollywood?
Yeah, I'm trying. It just keeps freezing up on me.
All right.
If you want to go ahead, I'll try to switch over to my phone real quick.
Coaching changes for Clemson. Out is Lamonsky Hall, defensive ends coach. He was fired. They bring in Chris Rumpf for defensive ends, and he's coming over from Minnesota Vikings, where he coached the defensive lineman. All right, they lose their top tackler and linebacker, Jeremiah Trotter, who got drafted in NFL draft. Nate Wiggins also got drafted in NFL draft. Cornerback, defensive tackle, Tyler Davis, NFL draft. Defensive end, Xavier Thomas, NFL draft. Defensive tackle, Rook Ororo, also got drafted by the NFL. And safety, Andrew Makuba, has moved over to Texas. Clemson doesn't do a whole lot in the transfer portal in terms of bringing players in, but one newcomer to highlight is a top freshman there, and that's linebacker Sammy Brown coming in. In terms of returning production, they return linebacker Barrett Carter, who should be that lead linebacker going into 2024. He had 56 tackles a year ago. And then he should be off to the NFL draft and definitely has some NFL draft potential. I actually think he might have been better than Jeremiah Trotter in terms of NFL potential. They also returned safety R.J. Mickens, who had 39 tackles a year ago, and safety Khalil Barnes, who had 38 tackles a year ago. They returned Peter Woods, T.J. Parker along that defensive line, Wade Woodas, another linebacker that returns. This, despite all the losses in the NFL draft, Clemson just, especially on defense, they just usually reload. And this year looks no different. They look to be another strong defense here for the ACC. Moving over to the Duke Blue Devils, a lot of coaching changes here. Out is Mike Elko. He is now the head coach over at Texas A&M. Ishmael Aristide, the cornerbacks coach, follows him over to Texas A&M. And Lyle Hemphill, who's a safeties coach, moves over to James Madison to become the defensive coordinator. They bring in Manny Diaz. He's the head coach. He was formerly the Penn State defensive coordinator. Jonathan Patke is the defensive coordinator. He comes over from Texas State, where he was defensive coordinator. Rick Leister is a safeties coach. He was an analyst at Penn State. Gabe Infante is special teams coordinator and defensive tackles, also an analyst over from Penn State. And finally, Viangelo Bentley, cornerbacks coach. He's coming from the NFL, where he was an assistant with the New England Patriots. They lose defensive tackle Dwayne Carter, got drafted in the NFL draft. Linebacker Dorian Mossy is off to Auburn. Cornerback Al Blades Jr. is out of eligibility. Defensive tackle Anais Peebles is over to Virginia Tech. And defensive end R.J. Oben has moved on to Notre Dame. They bring in defensive tackle Kendi Charles from Liberty, and linebacker Alex Howard comes over from Texas A&M. In terms of returning production, they do return their top 3 tacklers from a year ago. Trey Freeman, linebacker, and 95 tackles. Safety Jalen Stinson, 79 tackles, and linebacker Nick Morris Jr. with 57 tackles. So they look pretty good at linebacker, but they got a lot of replacement along that defensive line. So, at the defensive line, I'm going to assume is kind of a work in progress, losing both their starting tackles and their top edge from a year ago. Next up is Florida State, and they have no defensive coaching changes. They lose their top 2 tacklers and linebacker Tatum Bethune off the NFL, as well as Kalen DeLoach. Cornerback Renardo Green off the NFL. Safety Akeem Dent. Defensive tackle Braden Fisk. Defensive end Jared Verse. Cornerback Jarian Jones. All those guys are off the NFL. Defensive tackle Fabian Lovitz out of eligibility. Cornerback Greedy Vance Jr. moves over to USC. They bring in Saoni Lolohea, defensive lineman from Oregon State. Cornerback Omarion Cooper from Colorado. Defensive lineman Grady Kelly from Colorado State. Linebacker Cam Riley from Auburn. Defensive lineman Tomiwa Durojaye from West Virginia. Linebacker Marvin Jones Jr. from Georgia. Linebacker Sean Murphy from Alabama. Cornerback Devontae Brown, Miami. Defensive back Earl Little II. They lose a ton of production along that defense. Their top 2 leading tacklers that return are number 3 and number 4, and that's Shaheem Brown, defensive back, who had 53 tackles a year ago, and DJ Lundy, a linebacker, who had 52 tackles a year ago. They do also return Patrick Payton along that defensive line, and Ventrell Cypress, the third cornerback. I don't expect this defense to be nearly as strong as it was a year ago. Be interesting to kind of see what Florida State, what they choose to build with there, because their front 7, man, takes pretty much the whole defense, right? Other than maybe 2 or 3 guys, they lose everybody in that starting defense. So it's gonna
a huge blow for them, right? When you think about it, you're losing Tatum Bethune, you're losing Jared Verse, you're losing Brandon Fisk. That's huge. What they lost is going to be so hard to replace, and then you add in what they got to replace on the offense, right? They're bringing in a new QB and all this, a new running back. So they've got a huge hill to climb. If you want to go ahead and lead while I had to restart my laptop, I'm just going to use my phone, but until my sheet comes back up, go ahead. Sorry.
All right. Next up is the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Coaching changes out is Travaris Tillman. He was defensive backs coach. Andrew Thacker, safeties, he's out. Kevin Scherer, defensive coordinator, is out. He moves over to Georgia State. They bring in Kyle Pope from Memphis. Jess Simpson from Duke. Tyler Santucci comes over from Duke, and Corey Peoples comes over from Georgia State. Ricky Brumfield comes over from is also going to be the cornerbacks and special teams coordinator. Who they lose defensive back Jalen King out of eligibility, linebacker Paul Mwala out of eligibility, defensive lineman Kyle Kennard is off to South Carolina, and defensive back KJ Wallace is off to UCLA. They bring in defensive end Romello Height coming over from USC, and defensive tackle Thomas Gore coming over from Miami. In terms of returning production, they do return their top 3 tacklers from a year ago. Their number 1 tackler last year was linebacker Kyle Efford with 76 tackles. And then the next 2 were defensive backs LaMiles Brooks with 65 and Clayton Powell Lee with 62 tackles. Again, they surprised last year, I think, but I think Georgia Tech has one of the toughest schedules this year. And I don't look for them to have a great season record wise. I don't know that there's anyone that I would advise, at least at this point in time, that you roster from Georgia Tech.
Yeah, me either. I think you're just kind of waiting and seeing if somebody kind of stands out the first 2 or 3 games that's kind of doing everything. But other than that, I'm with you on that. I don't think there's really anybody that I would target off their defense. Not right now, anyway.
Yeah. Next up is Louisville Cardinals. They have no coaching changes. But it was a weird offseason for Louisville. They brought in a lot of guys in the spring, and then a lot of those same guys turned around and left.
Well, Tyler Barron was one of them, right? He transferred from Tennessee to there, and then he transfers from there to go to Ole Miss. So
I thought he was at Miami. Is it Ole Miss?
Well, true. He was at Ole Miss and then went to Miami. So it's been a world. I think he's a classic example of a player chasing money. I really think that's what it is, because he didn't get what he wanted here. I think the James Pierce breakout last year kind of said, okay, I'm not going to get my money here, so let's go to Louisville. And it looked like he was going to be a good fit there because he was there for 3-4 months because he transferred.
All of spring practice.
Right. And then all of a sudden he just ups and transfers, and they were looking at Ole Miss, and I guess that didn't fall through, so he wound up in Miami. So I guess Miami gave him the money, but he should be a good fit down there with Bang, though.
Yeah, so folks at Louisville loses. I didn't even include Barron on here because he was only there for spring practice. So they lose cornerback Jarvis Brownlee Jr., who got drafted in the NFL. He's now a Tennessee Titan. Defensive back Cameron Kelly is out of eligibility. And defensive tackle Jermaine Lole, who was a hot commodity in the portal. I think he was originally Oklahoma, and then he switched to Texas. So they lose him. They bring in linebacker Miles Jernigan from California and edge Tremel Logan coming over from South Florida. In terms of returners, they do return their top 2 tacklers from a year ago in linebacker TJ Quinn, 87 tackles, and defensive back Devin Neal with 72 tackles. And then their top defensive lineman also returns in Ashton Gelade. He was kind of their, he's their sack guy. He had 10 sacks a year ago. Definitely an interesting prospect for the NFL for Ashton Gelade. All right, moving over to the Miami Hurricanes, we kind of touched on there just a little bit. Coaching changes. Out is Jamal Adey. Secondary is going to the Buffalo Bills, and they bring in Chevis Jackson to coach the defensive backs. He comes over from Marshall. They lose a lot too along that defense, but as we've already said, they've been one of the big spenders in the transfer portal, and they bring in quite a bit. They bring in safety James Williams from the NFL. They lose safety James Williams off to the NFL, also a Tennessee Titan. Cam Kitchens off the NFL, Leonard Taylor off the NFL, defensive tackle. Linebacker Corey Flagg Jr. over to Missouri. Defensive end Jafari Harvey off to SMU. Defensive lineman Chance Williams to Charlotte. Defensive tackle Thomas Gore, who I think we said ended up at Georgia Tech. Defensive end Nigel Kelly off to UCF. And defensive lineman Cyrus Moss is in the portal. They bring in safety Isaiah Taylor from Arizona. Defensive tackle Marley Cook from Middle Tennessee. Safety Michael Powell from Washington. Defensive lineman Elijah Alston from Marshall. Defensive back Dione Hill from Marshall. And edge, the aforementioned Tyler Barron, Tennessee / couple months in Louisville.
Right.
I mean, it really feels like Miami's kind of going all in this year, right? They're going all in to make that 12-team playoff. They've been big spenders in the portal from an offense and defensive standpoint, and it'll be interesting to kind of see how it all comes together, right?
Right.
You know, they didn't quite burn it to the ground like Dion did last year and then try to rebuild through the portal, but they brought in a lot of high profile guys through the portal, and like I said, be interesting to see how it all meshes and if it works out for them, and if they can make the make a run there in the ACC and then ultimately make it to the 12-team playoff.
Right. Well, like I said, Barron will be a good edge piece for them, opposite of Bain. That'll give them two good edge rushers. But the Marley Cook, the transfer from Middle Tennessee State, I was surprised they got him, and that's a really good get for them because he's one of the better interior defenders in the country. I think he was underrated, in my opinion, what he did last year for the Blue Raiders. So for them to get him, I think that's really going to help their defense.
All right, moving over to NC State. They have no defensive coaching changes. They lose their top two tacklers from a year ago, Peyton Wilson, who's now a Pittsburgh Steeler, and linebacker Jalen Scott, who is out of eligibility. They bring in defensive lineman Chaz Wallace from Colorado, and safety Jihad Carter comes over from Ohio State. Their top returning tacklers, number 3, Sean Brown, safety, 66 tackles, defensive back Devon Boykin, 54 tackles, and linebacker Caden Fordham with 53 tackles. Probably their top defensive lineman returning is defensive tackle Davin Van. So maybe Fordham and Van might be someone that might be worth looking at from a roster standpoint. Interested to see what Jihad Carter can do there at NC State. He was as you might expect, a pretty high level recruit for Ohio State. Things didn't work out there, and so be interesting to see if he can get some run there with the Wolfpack.
Well, Jihad Carter, that was kind of writing on the wall that he was going to move, right? Just a crowded room, so I think it was inevitable that he was going to move. And then the Davin Van, if I'm not mistaken, he comes over from NC State, right? So,
well, he's still at NC State,
or not NC State. He come over from.
He was at NC State last year. Now maybe he came over the year before that.
Maybe it was the year before. But yeah, that's their two key players. I think that they're going to need to step up this year.
All right. Next up is Notre Dame. Coaching changes for Notre Dame. Out is Chris O'Leary. He was the safeties coach. He goes on to the LA Chargers, and they bring in Max Bulla, linebackers. He was formerly a grad assistant there at Notre Dame. They lose their leading tackler and linebacker J.D. Bertrand. I think he's with Atlanta Falcons now.
Yep.
Defensive lineman Javonte Jean-Baptiste. He's also in the NFL. Linebacker Maurice Luafau, Dallas Cowboys. Cornerback Cam Hart in the NFL. Safety DJ Brown out of eligibility. And safety Thomas Harper out of eligibility. They bring back, or they get in the portal, cornerback Rod Hurd II from Northwestern. Safety Jordan Clark from Arizona State. And then we mentioned earlier the top edge from Duke, R.J. Oben, moves over to Notre Dame. In terms of their leading guys, they return Howard Cross III, defensive tackle. He was their third leading tackler a year ago, 65 total tackles. Jack Kaiser, linebacker, 52 tackles, and then Xavier Watts, who had that monster game against USC. I think he intercepted Caleb Williams like 3 times, one of them for a pick 6. He had 47 tackles a year ago. And defensive lineman Riley Mills also returns. Those 2 defensive linemen, Mills and Cross, they're pretty good. They're pretty good players. Same with Xavier Watts, the safety.
Yeah, I would definitely suggest trying to add Watts to your IDP Devy rosters. Cross seems like he's been there forever. I believe this is his super senior season, if I'm not mistaken. Because he's been there for a little while.
All right. Next up is the North Carolina Tar Heels. Coaching changes. Out is Gene Chizik, defensive coordinator, resigned, and Tim Cross, defensive line coach, resigned. They bring in Ted Monachino to coach the defensive lines. He was an analyst formerly at North Carolina, and Jeff Collins comes in to take over the defensive coordinator role. They lose their leading tackler from a year ago, linebacker Cedric Gray, also a Tennessee Titan. Defensive back Giovanni Biggers out of eligibility, and linebacker Sebastian Cheeks moves over to Wisconsin. They bring in defensive tackle Joshua Harris coming over from Ole Miss. They return linebacker Power Eccles, who was their second leading tackler, 102 tackles. Antavius Lane, safety, with 62 tackles, and Kamon Rucker, who's an edge for them, 61 tackles. Those are probably the Eccles, Lane, and Rucker are probably the 3 primary guys to know for this defensive unit for the Tar Heels. They also lost Miles Murphy, a defensive tackle, who's also off to the NFL.
Right. Yeah. Power Eccles is definitely the guy you want off that defense. With Cedric Gray going, I would imagine there's going to be a ton more tackles for him. Now, they've got Camion Rucker as the jack, and then they've got Amari Campbell on the weak side. He's just a sophomore, and they really like him. I don't know if he's somebody that I'm really targeting right now, but maybe keep him on your watch list and see how he does, because Gray had a lot of tackles, so that volume has to go somewhere. Yeah, so while I think Power Eccles could potentially see an uptick in tackles, yeah, somebody has to step up next to him. So, and then I like Antavius Lane too, back there at safety. He maybe sees a uptick in tackles as well.
Yeah, he's always been a good tackler.
Yeah,
I don't know about his NFL potential. I think he's a little on the smaller side, but he's definitely been a good college producer for sure. All right, next up, Pittsburgh Panthers. Out is Charlie Partridge, defensive line coach. He moves over to the Indianapolis Colts, and they bring in Tim Dowse to coach defensive line. He was formerly the defensive ends coach at East Carolina. They lose linebacker Solomon DeShields off to Texas A&M, linebacker Bengali Kamara off to South Carolina, defensive lineman Deion Hayes to Colorado, linebacker Shane Simon out of eligibility, and defensive back MJ Devonshire, cornerback, he's off to the NFL. They bring in one of our favorites from the G5, linebacker Key Thompson, comes over from Ohio. And then they bring in edge Chief Borders coming over from Nebraska. They do return their leading tackler from a year ago and safety Donovan McMillan, who had 105 tackles, as well as defensive back Javon McIntyre, who had 85 tackles. Key Thompson, man, it's going to be – he should be in for a pretty sizable role there as their starting middle linebacker. And I think he's someone that Again, I don't really know about NFL potential, but from a college production standpoint, he should definitely get you, I would imagine, 100+ tackles for Pitt this coming year.
Yeah, he should easily, I think, hit that mark. And that's, in fantasy, that's exactly what you're wanting. Especially, he should rack up a lot of solo tackles as well. So definitely a name you want to watch for.
All right, Stanford Cardinals, no coaching changes. They lose safety Alakai Gilman to Utah, defensive lineman Jackson Moy to Tennessee. Stanford is also one of those schools, and not unlike Clemson, where Clemson just doesn't want transfers. Stanford has a hard time getting transfers in because of academics. But I did just read something this week where some things are changing, and maybe it'll make it easier for Stanford. But they do bring in cornerback Javion Green coming over from Washington. But, they pretty much return everybody from a year ago. Now, they were really bad a year ago. The whole team was, right? So it'd be interesting to see if they can make any improvements. But they return leading tackler, linebacker Gathan Bernardell, 81 tackles. The second leading tackler, Tristan Sinclair, 65 tackles. Colin Wright, cornerback, and Mitch Ligber, their next two guys with 51 and 50 tackles. Other than that, like David Bailey, edge, definitely someone to know. He had 5 sacks a year ago. Was their number 1 sack guy. He's a junior now. He's someone that we've liked, since day one. But the team just hasn't really been. Stanford hasn't been good for a while. Be interesting to see with the move to the ACC if they show any kind of signs of improvement.
Yeah, they were very tough to watch at times last year. Even as much as I like watching the Pac-12 after dark, they just, like you said, they just weren't very good. And outside of a few people like Fernando, Wright, and Sinclair, which is their top 3 tacklers, right? Outside of those guys, they didn't have a whole lot. They lost their big interior guy, Jackson Moy. He transferred to Tennessee, so that's going to hurt them up front. Offensively, I'm not too impressed with them either, right? So I think you could see more of the same this year. And I think it's going to be those 3, Bernardell, Sinclair, and Wright. Those, if you're looking for players for your IDP roster, those are probably the 3 that you're going to target for that. Finally, got my screen back up here.
SMU.
SMU, right? And just in time, no coaching changes. Well, they have one. They got one. Yeah, they got one. So they're bringing in Sam Dunham to coach the edges. And he's coming. He was formerly an analyst for them, so he's going to be coaching their edges.
So they lose defensive tackle Elijah Chapman out of eligibility, cornerback Charles Woods out of eligibility. They bring in defensive end Jafari Harvey from Miami, linebacker Justin Medlock from Utah, and defensive back Deuce Harmon from Texas A&M. They return their top 7 tacklers from a year ago. You got Kobe Wilson, led them last year with 73 tackles. Then you got safety Isaiah and Nwokobia with 56 tackles, and then linebacker Ahmad Walker with 55. Their top defensive lineman is Elijah Roberts, a defensive end. Is he the one that I think they call him Baby Bull or something like that?
Yes.
He also, if I remember correctly, like occasionally they'll use him on the goal line as a goal line running back, don't they?
Yeah, he's like a fullback, kind of like sometimes, but yeah, they do use him on occasion.
Yep, he led them last year with eight and a half sacks. So, probably, I don't know, Kobe Wilson and Roberts are probably the 2 guys to look at here, I guess.
Yeah, for me, I think it's Roberts because of the pass rushing, right? 12 and a half tackles for a loss, 10 sacks. That led the team by a wide margin. So for pass rushers, I think he's definitely a guy that you could look at, especially if your league scores sacks pretty heavy, right? He's going to be someone that you look at for sure.
All right, next up, the Syracuse Orange.
The Syracuse Orange. So they fired Dino Babers, their head coach, right? So we've talked about it in other episodes. Anytime you fire your head coach, there's generally a firing down the line, right? Because the new head coach wants to bring his group in. So replacing him as the head coach of the Orange is going to be Fran Brown, who's coming over from Georgia, where he was a defensive backs coach. With him, he's going to bring Elijah Robinson to be his defensive coordinator. He was at Texas A&M, where he coached the defensive line. He's bringing in Nick Williams to coach the defensive ends, and he was at Colorado, where he coached the same position. Robert Wright is going to be the linebackers coach, and he was a former defensive coordinator for Buffalo. And then he's going to bring in Joe Schaefer to coach the defensive backs, and he was an analyst for the Texas A&M Aggies last year. So a nice mix, right? A little bit of everything. So I don't know. I thought Babers would do well up there, but it just never kind of gelled. Just never kind of got it together. But we'll have to see what Fran Brown does with his coaching staff in place for this year.
So they lose defensive end Caleb Okechukwu out of eligibility. Linebacker Stephon Thompson is off to Nebraska. They bring in one of Hollywood's favorites, safety Devin Grant, coming over from Buffalo. Defensive end Fadil Diggs from Texas A&M. Defensive tackle Deion Wilson Jr. from New Mexico State. And then a former Orange who went to LSU for a year and now back with Syracuse, and cornerback Deuce Chestnut coming back to Syracuse. So that's kind of interesting there, right? Obviously different coaching staff, but he was at Syracuse, left Syracuse, went to LSU, and is back to Syracuse. I think
that's a good move for him, though.
Yeah. I mean, obviously he wasn't getting the playing time he wanted at LSU. So, yeah. They return their leading tackler, Marlo Wax, linebacker, 105 tackles, and their second leading tackler, safety Justin Barron, had 89. It's going to be interesting to see how because Devin Grant's kind of been a high tackle guy and the box guy, and how are him and Barron going to play together, or are they going to play together? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if one of them kind of changes the roles that we're used to, right? Because they're both certainly not going to be in the box.
Right. If it was me, I think I would leave Devin Grant kind of back in the secondary because I think he's much better at coverage, right? But I'm with you. With him back there, he's going to eat into the tackles of a lot of other players, right? So, that's going to be interesting to see for sure just how that plays out. Man, that's tough because, I mean, like Marlo Wax, he had 110 tackles last year, 11.5 for a loss. I think with Devin Grant in there, I'd be more comfortable with Wax around the 90-plus mark because I think there's some legitimate eating into numbers there. Now, just who it is, I don't know, but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to affect Justin Barron, the safety, as well.
Yeah. Up next, and before I move on, and Deuce Chestnut, I was surprised that he left to start with, right? To go to LSU.
Well, I mean, he was getting like NFL draft buzz before he left, but then he went to LSU and didn't do much at LSU.
Well, and he was a high recruit, right? When he come out of high school, I think he went to LSU because who was the other top corner? There was another corner that went there about the same time.
Denver Harris left, didn't he? I don't remember when he left.
I don't remember. It might have been him, but I think what happened is they got all these transfers and recruits.
They brought a lot of portal guys in last year.
Yeah, so I think the playing time was just kind of mix and match, and I think that's kind of why he's like, well, this ain't working out. So kind of sucks that he pretty much wasted a year, but I think for him, it's a good move to go back to where you had success and where you're going to have some pretty good playing time. You don't really have to battle in Syracuse like you would at LSU for playing time. And like I said, he had some success there. So maybe if you're playing in some IDP Devy leagues that has position specific, right, where you have to start corners, he may be somebody you keep an eye on because he when he was there, he had a pretty good run with them. So just something to keep an eye on. But yeah, I think Devin Grant's definitely the one you want. Him and Marlo Wax. The Virginia Cavaliers. So they got a couple changes here. They got rid of their linebackers coach, Clint Centum. He's now at Illinois to be their outside linebackers coach, and replacing him, they brought in Mike Adams to coach linebackers, and he's coming over from West Georgia, where he was a defensive coordinator. That's a big step up from him, right? And from Division II to Division I. But I always like that. But when I see a coaching change, I always like to see defensive coordinators going somewhere else because they have, outside of your head coach, your offensive and defensive coordinators, they have a lot on them, right? I mean, I know it's just one side of the ball, but they're fairly well in tune with what's going on as far as responsibilities and how the things work. So just kind of having that experience or that expertise, I think that helps, especially when you have a coaching change. So I like that for Virginia, and they need it because they've had a rough last couple of seasons on the football field.
So they lose safety Cohen King out of eligibility and cornerback Devon Kyle out of eligibility. They bring in safety Kempton Shine from Eastern Michigan, linebacker Corey Thomas Jr. from Akron, and linebacker Dorian Jones from Cincinnati. Shine and Thomas were two of the better players in the MAC, and so it'll be interesting to kind of see if they can transition and keep up that production there in the ACC. They do return their leading tackler from a year ago, safety Jonas Sanker, 107 tackles, and then linebacker James Jackson with 80 tackles, and linebacker Cameron Robinson with 71 tackles. Probably their leading defensive lineman is Jameer Carter, defensive tackle, and then Chico Bennett Jr. and Cam Butler. Seems like those two guys, those two defensive ends, have been there forever. They got to be super seniors by now, both Butler and Bennett, and they've been productive in the past. So be interesting to see if they can kind of get things going here again in 2024. They weren't neither one of them did much last year, but they've certainly both had their moments in years past, Butler and Chico Bennett.
Yeah, and I think for me, I would rather have Butler. He only played in 4 games last year before he was out with an injury. So he had 5 TFLs, 3.5 sacks. So, if you can get a full season out of him, that kind of projects to like 15 and 12. So, I mean, if they could get that kind of production out of him, that would be huge for them. Up next is Wake Forest Demon Deacons. No coaching changes.
You skipped Virginia Tech.
No. Oh, I did skip Virginia Tech. Well, we'll come back and get them. Let's get Wake Forest since I'm already on. Wake Forest has no coaching changes to speak of. They lost some stuff on defense, though.
So they lose 3 of their top 4 tacklers. Linebacker Jacob Roberts out of eligibility. Safety Malik Mustafa. I believe he's a San Francisco 49er now. Defensive back Shalon Gaines out of eligibility. And cornerback Deshaun Jones is off to Alabama. They bring in cornerback Capone Blue from Kent State. They do return their number 1 tackler from a year ago, and that's linebacker Dylan Hazen with 86 tackles. As we said, they lose their next 3 guys, and then they return Jasheen Davis along that defensive line. Be interested to see who. I watched their spring game, and I remember them talking, and I can't remember who the player was, but they were talking about the guy that's going to take over Malik Mustafa's role. And they seemed like, I wish I could remember his name. I got to go back and watch the game. But, like, they were super encouraged by that safety Man, I don't. Do you know who it was, Hollywood?
Not off the top of my head. I haven't seen their spring game yet. I'm trying to look.
I have to go back and
Was
bring
he
it up and mention it on another episode. But they were super stoked at that guy that's going to replace Mustafa. They kind of felt like he had the same skill set. So, that could be an interesting name there for the Demon Deacons.
Well, that's big shoes to fill because Mustafa was one of their better players, right? I mean, he did a lot for them last year. It'll be interesting to see. You talked about Jashin Davis returning, and that's huge for them, right? 17 TFL, 7.5 sacks last year. But without Jacob Roberts on the other side, who's going to be that guy that steps up next to him, right? So it'll be interesting to see there. I'm trying to find this real quick. Is it Devon Patterson? Or Nick Anderson?
Oh, I already switched off of them. Hold on.
Because I'm looking at our lads. That's the two.
So Nick Anderson's a defensive back.
Starters.
Who was the other guy? Patterson's a defensive back. Anderson's a defensive back.
The other one was Devon Patterson.
They're both defensive backs. So I don't remember which one it was. To be honest with you, which one they said would take over the Mustafa role. My guess is maybe Anderson. Because I wouldn't think it'd be a freshman. Patterson's a freshman. I don't know. I need to go. If you can watch their spring game on ESPN Plus, and it's like in the first 5 minutes of the broadcast is when they're talking about the kid. I just can't.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
For the life of me, I just can't remember his name.
So now that I'm looking at our lads, they've got Devon Patterson, a redshirt freshman, as the starting strong safety, and they've got Rashawn Tung, a redshirt freshman, as the backup. Other than Nick Anderson, they've got slotted as the free safety, I don't see a whole lot else there. I'll have to go check that out. Not exactly 100% sure. Now we'll go back and pick up Virginia Tech, the Hokies. They didn't have any coaching changes either. So you're right.
Virginia Tech, I think, is going to be one of those sneaky teams that could win the ACC this year.
Right.
They are. I think that offensively and defensively, I think they are one of the better teams in the ACC. They do lose a little bit, but I think the defense will be better than it was last year for sure. They lose linebacker Alan Tisdale out of eligibility, cornerback Derek Canteen to Cincinnati, and defensive end Mario Kendricks is out of eligibility. But they bring in linebacker Sam Brumfield from Middle Tennessee. In my opinion, he's gonna slot right in to that Alan Tisdale role. Yeah. They bring in defensive tackle Anias Peebles from Duke. That's a big upgrade for the interior of that Hokie defense. And it's going to make a huge difference for them. They also bring in Curtis Perry, defensive lineman from Alabama, and linebacker Caleb Spencer from Miami. They returned their leading tackler from a year ago, linebacker Keely Lawson, who had 76 tackles, safety Jalen Stroman, who had 55 tackles, and cornerback Mansour Delane with 52 tackles, and then Antoine Powell-Ryland, their edge, their leading sack guy from a year ago, also returns. I think they could be one of the teams playing for the ACC championship, and could be a dark horse candidate, I think, to possibly make the college football playoffs.
Ooh, that would be interesting.
Somebody from the ACC's got to do it, right? I mean, off the top of my head, who do you think the top three teams in the ACC are? I'm thinking Clemson, Miami, and Virginia Tech.
Definitely Clemson and Miami, I think. Clemson, Miami. I mean, if Florida State can get some things in place quickly, I don't know. They got a lot of question marks.
They lose so much on that defense.
Yeah, that's tough. I like the pick though, Virginia Tech. I mean, most people would not pick that, right? And the Aeneas Peebles transfer, that's huge for them because he is a big dude. He is a big dude, and I'm kind of surprised that he transferred. Right? I figured he would kind of stay where he was, but you never know. Maybe he got an NIL deal or whatever. But yeah, that's going to be huge for them. I like the Sam Brunfield transfer too. He's going to slot right in there at middle linebacker. That's going to be huge. Man, you got me thinking. I don't. Maybe Virginia Tech. Man, that's tough. I would have to go back. I don't
think they have a tough schedule either. So, yeah.
Well, that's going to be the key. If their schedule's light, then that definitely helps them, right?
Yeah. As much as
I got to think North Carolina would probably be there, even though they lost.
Nah, I think North Carolina is going to be one of the worst teams in the ACC. Personally,
you think so?
Yeah.
I know they lost their quarterback. So they have to figure that out, right?
Losing Drake May, I don't think they have there is no Drake May on that roster right now. The offensive coordinator they brought in,
they're going to run it, right?
But teams know they're going to run it. So that defense that defense has not been good. That defense didn't get any better. They got worse, right? They lose Cedric Gray. And so they might want to run the ball, but the defense might be so bad where they just can't run the ball. I mean, I don't know. I think Carolina is in for a rude awakening this year.
Maybe. I mean, they need Desmond Evans, who was a high recruit. He's slotted in as the starter at defensive end. We talked about Power Eccles. We talked about Intavius Lane. I mean, if they can get some help out of their defense and just be solid, I don't think they have to be great, not in the ACC, right? But if they can just be solid and get some decent quarterback play, because they're getting Max Johnson, who come over from Texas Tech. Is that right? I think he transferred from Texas A&M, I think it was.
Texas A&M.
Yeah. So if they can just get him to play decent and they can get that defense to kind of step up, I think they lean on that running game with Amari and Hampton because he's a dude. He's a stud. So while we both picked Clemson and Miami as the front runners, it is kind of up in the air, the rest of the league, right? So I don't think you have to be.
Well, Miami just, I don't know, like they have the talent, but I feel like they always underachieve. Always.
Right. And with the way that Carolina has done with quarterback Sam Howell and then May last year, I think if they can just get good play out of Johnson, I think they'll be all right. I think they'll be in that 3 to 4 spot easily. That's just how I see it. But yeah, I like the Virginia Tech pick, man. I mean, with an easy schedule, it definitely helps, right?
Yeah.
So we'll have to see. So that does it for the ACC. We'll be back next Wednesday. We will be doing this every Wednesday at 8 o'clock now with the changes. So next week we'll be back with the Big 12, transfer portal, and coaching changes. We thank all of you for listening. I see that there's a number of you watching live. Don't be afraid to send in questions, trades, whatever. We'll be more than happy to break those down, discuss them with you, give advice, whatever. And then help us grow, right? We're trying to grow everything, build this brand. So help us grow. You can go over to our Discord. It's combined with IDP Nation. It's in our bio, so you can click the link there. Help us grow there. Help us on Twitter. Go to YouTube, right? Help us out there. So please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, iHeartRadio. Go over to YouTube, give us a follow and like there. You can follow us at Devy IDP Grind on Twitter. You can follow me at Hollywood Titan, and you can follow Justice at Justice_2318. Justice also does the G5 Hive with
Luke.
With Lucas, and I forget his last name.
Luke Probasco.
Luke Probasco, yes. Go check that pod out as well. It's a really good podcast. They do a great job. Very informative. They do that on Monday nights, I think around
right now. Well, that's normally when we do the live show, but right now we're doing all the G5 team interviews or previews, if you will. And in those previews, we talk about every single position group, offense and defense. So we're about halfway done with those right now. They're all on our YouTube channel. Go check them out. We're interviewing every single G5 team. So 64 teams. I think we're right around 30 released, and we're hot and heavy, man. We're releasing 3 a week: Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 a.m. every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday right now. And we have some special episodes coming up here soon too. So yeah, definitely check it out. Like I said, offense and defense.
Yep, and we have a couple of interviews that we're working on, so stay tuned for them. Something that come across our table today, so hopefully we can get those scheduled within a week or so and get those out to you. And like I said, don't be shy. Throw the questions in the chat, or you can hit us up in our DMs. We're always glad to talk football, help you out, trades, values, whatever it is. It's good stuff. I mean, we like to do it. So, like I said, we'll be back next week with the Big 12. Or Big 12.
Yeah, Big 12.
Yeah, the Big 12. So tune in next week. We appreciate you listening. Spread the word. Help us grow. And we will be back next week. I can't find it.
You want me to play it?